Once again, we bid farewell to a Reading FC season that dragged us through the emotional ringer. From disdain and despair to hope and joy, the 2018-19 campaign will go down as yet another year which saw the club fight for its life and, hopefully, come out stronger the other side. Welcome to episode 195 of the Tilehurst End podcast with your host Marc Mayo, the season review show. And of course, to look back on the campaign, we have two of the finest Reading minds, and in no particular order, the Tilehurst End founder, Dan at Wimbush. How's it going, mate?
Not so bad, Mark. Thank you for having me on and letting me back in through the back door. Always appreciated to appear on and wrap up the campaign.
Yeah, and doing that as well is Dave Handbags Harris. How's it going, mate?
Not too bad. I'm all right.
Thank you, boys, for turning up tonight. And just before we crack on, then, it's a quick word on the Patreon campaign, of course, which continues to be a real sort of joy for us and a real something that we can appreciate, that the people who listen to the show and read the website and follow us on social media just show their appreciation to us. And obviously the money does go into kind of half saving for a rainy day and half new equipment and new ways that we can cover the football team and whatnot. So hugely thankful for everyone who continues into that, and we will make sure that during the summer, even though the podcast goes into shutdown, obviously the website and social media will keep up for you. And of course that means that we need people to help us out in a different way, and that means writers and people who can get involved on the website and chip in with a bit of news, a bit of opinion, the odd feature here and there. There is absolutely tons of space for people to get involved. That is the life and blood of the Tilehurst End. And anyone who is, maybe you're just about to go into uni, or you've just, you're coming out and you're looking for a job, or, you're perhaps into your not so young years and you want to reinvigorate your connection with the club and the fans. It is the perfect way of doing that. And I use the website writer pool as basically a gateway into the podcast as well. So it's a great way to get involved with all things Reading. And speaking of which, we'll crack on then. It's the season review.
The Tilehurst End podcast.
By Reading fans, for Reading fans.
So let's cast our minds back to August and Paul Clement selecting a team to face Derby on Friday night to kick off the championship season, and Vito Mannone not doing us any kind of pride really, and that's that opening game, that 2-1 defeat to Derby, kind of set the tone for the season that we had. To an extent, certainly the first few weeks, and we were winless in the first 6 games. It was a kind of case of here we go again. And Dan, let's pick up with that opening spell, and after a season we just had before where we survived on the last day, just how much did that opening stint of 6 winless games and the kind of feeling around the club just kind of suck any sort of momentum or feel good factor that we might have had?
I think the momentum was sucked out in that opening game against Derby. I think, to go 1-0 up in the way we did with Bodvarsson scoring, on the telly against Frank Lampard's Derby, everything seemed all right. Okay, maybe we're, last season was a blip and we're getting back to it. But no, concede 2 poor goals. The Mannone era in particular completely sort of ruining the confidence of the side. And it just continued on from there. It was clear right from the word go that none of the new signings had what it takes. Had what it took even to get it, to get us up to that next level and away from trouble. And things just spiraled. Things just nosedived from that point of view. And again, there was nothing for the fans to get behind. There was nothing for any of us to hang on to. Paul Clement did nothing to sort of reassure anybody that he was, in fact, the man to go forward, yet alone the chief executive, Mr. Gourlay. And, people were fearing the worst early on. I will say that I did think even through this that I thought, that there's enough in this squad for us to stay up, just by the sheer number of players we had. I thought eventually they were going to find the right combination, but that it wasn't fun from the off. I'm sure you'll agree, Dave.
Just listening to you talk there and kind of reminiscing and going through that game. That first half, actually, we were absolutely all over Derby. But you're absolutely right. With the sheer fragility of the side, not completely compounded by a keeper who made error after error after error during his time. I mean, yes, all right, he's out on loan at the moment. Can't see him returning. To be brutally honest, you've nailed it pretty much, Dan. There was, we in this particular instance we played fairly well and ended up losing. And there are instances throughout the Clement, this season, the Clement era, where we played fairly well and ended up on the receiving end. I think we got fed up of the phrase "fine margins" in the end, didn't we? Fine margins are all well and good if you're on the right end of them more often than not, and we very rarely were.
I will say though, in those early games, and I think throughout the first half of the season, I think we very rarely got properly turned over.
We only lost with one by more than one goal. I think it was West Brom after quite a few weeks, wasn't it?
Yeah, and that sort of gave you hope. Again, going back to what I said, that there was something in this squad that would get them over the line. We weren't getting the sort of poundings that teams like Rotherham were getting. But I think that's what added to the frustration of the fans. Certainly from my point of view, you sat there and you looked at the names on that team sheet and you went, there's really experienced, there's Premier League players on there, there's experienced Championship players on there. How are they not pulling it together? Is it the manager's fault? Is it just bad luck? Whatever it was, you sort of just sat back in your seat and went, I don't know what's going to change this. I don't know what's going to change it. And I'm sure we'll come on to it later, but as I tweeted after the Birmingham game, one player in that starting lineup against Derby survived to play in that Birmingham game this weekend, and that was Andy Yeardom. And that just sums up completely how poorly prepared we were going into the season.
And it's interesting when it comes down to Paul Clement, because I remember at the time thinking Paul Clement's not a brilliant manager. I never thought he was going to, take us to the Premier League or anything. But I did feel like he was generally speaking, he was saying kind of the right things to the media. He was kind of exasperated at the right moments and took promise at the right moments as well. But one thing that did irk me, and I can spell this out for you now, was the lineup inconsistency. From the first game of the season against Derby to the second, we made 3 changes. The game after that, 3 changes. The game after that, 3 changes. The game after that, 2 changes. 2 more changes, then 4 more changes. That is just so much churn over. And yes, partly it comes from having so many players, because we just bulked out the squad to ridiculous levels in the summer. But also it comes from a manager who doesn't have the kind of the ruthlessness to say, you know what, I know you've just signed, but you're not good enough, and I'm going to park you over here, and maybe there's a bit of injuries as well, but that just sort of summarised for me how the squad just wasn't able to get going, wasn't able to find any consistency.
I think you've got to. That's absolutely right. That's bang right. There was an element, certainly an element of a manager desperately trying to find his right formula and certainly never finding it. But I think the problems go back a lot further than that. We've already mentioned the Derby game. I can't remember, and don't get me wrong, results are not the be-all and end-all when it comes to pre-season, but I can't remember going through a pre-season without a win. And that's 2 seasons on the trot. We've had poor pre-seasons, not just in terms of results, but also in terms of the type of preparation that we've undergone. We started the games late. I think we lasted about 10 days, 2 weeks from the beginning of pre-season training when everybody reconvenes to the first game. We had 5 games, and when you're losing to with strong sides to Eastleigh, to AFC Wimbledon, all right, we got, you could say, creditable draws against the 2 teams that we played overseas. It just didn't inspire any degree of confidence whatsoever.
I saw the Crystal Palace game, that friendly, and I really did think, wow, the gulf between a lower mid-table Prem club and Reading is massive. And I remember going in years past watching Reading play teams like, you might remember it, Dave, playing teams like Spurs and Chelsea in pre-season friendlies, and Reading were never that far away.
Yeah, I remember playing Southampton a few times, and Spurs were playing the division below.
Even Swansea and Bournemouth in the past few years.
Yeah, and giving creditable, a creditable fight. The 4-0 though had just been thoroughly outclassed, and that pushed its way. It seemed to push its way into the season where the manager hadn't found his formula whatsoever, and never did.
It goes back to recruitment though, doesn't it? And we talk about that lineup from the Derby game and people like Myler playing, and it's a whole talking point in itself. But Marc McNulty who signed Marc McNulty? What was Marc McNulty signed for? Because either there was something going on the training ground that none of us were privy to, or he wasn't signed by Paul Clement, because he just barely gave him a game. I think he played him up front with Baldock once and then sort of just abandoned the experiment, and that was it. He was gone.
Ironically, I think in that one game he played alongside Baldock, he looked like there was a bit of a chance. But
I thought so.
The thing is with Clement, he wasn't ever satisfied. And to be fair, you wouldn't be satisfied because he was playing Milo and Kelly, which isn't a very good central midfield combination. He wasn't happy with playing two up front, and therefore you have to reshape the team, and you have to maybe put someone like Swift or whoever he was going to put in there, and that again just kind of meant the team was in a constant state of fluctuation.
Yeah, it goes back to what Dave said. It's a manager who was scratching around trying to find his best lineup. Yeah, lineup system as well. We were changing. We were 4-2-3-1. We were 4-4-2. We were 4-5-1. I don't know what way Paul Clement went. I think he was just trying to be too clever, or maybe not even tried too clever, just trying to find desperately scratching onto anything that works. But nothing did work.
So too clever or a man out of his depth?
Yeah, I think a bit of both. I think the funny thing is that, coming into the job, what do we hear? You had Craig Bellamy and Darren Bent both say that this was a guy that is great on the training ground, but when he came to match days, didn't really deliver. And I can't remember. I think was it Chris Gunter? I think just after Clement left, I think sort of basically backed that up.
Well, Jan Kermigan said that he was basically
was one, yeah.
Jan Kermigan basically said he was too nice, and that he didn't want people shouting at each other, and that is befitting of an assistant manager who is the good cop to your Carlo Ancelotti bad cop, and I think that suits Paul Clement quite well when he's not the bad cop, because he doesn't have it in him. Perhaps that's something you can insinuate from that.
That bore itself out in the outgoings in the summer. We saw Van den Berg go, who, let's face it, isn't one who's not no shrinking violet. Jan Kermigan, obviously, we mentioned in his interview with you guys that he felt that he was too nice. There were a few characters, shall we say, that left in the summer, and of course, yeah, I say that absolutely bore itself out in the assertions from Jan.
It's interesting. One of the things that again was a major theme as the season went on, not just from the early weeks we've been talking about, that the break, the half-time break, and after that, Reading just sunk massively when it came to coming out into the second half. And I've got an excerpt from Will's report from the Bolton game, the one we lost 1-0 earlier in the season at the Madstad. His report on the Tilehurst End said, after a first half that had seen a lively and promising display from Reading, Phil Parkinson sent his Bolton team out early for the second half. Whether he had given them a bollocking or not, it was a statement. Bolton knew they needed to step up, and they started the half with intent. By contrast, Reading ambled out, began the half with an aimless Liam Moorhoof, and within 3 minutes Bolton had scored what was eventually the winner, and the game had changed. And that, it's probably a good symbolic way of saying what we've all been saying for the last 10 minutes, is that ultimately the team lacked direction, it lacked leadership, it lacked a tactical system that it understood. The players themselves weren't capable of taking the mantle themselves and going beyond what they've been told, and perhaps the players themselves just weren't good enough.
Yeah, I think that last sentence, you've nailed it. The players weren't good enough. I think Reading for too long now, probably since the Zingarevich era, have held on to players that aren't hungry, that aren't up for it. I mean, how long were we waiting for Thiago Ilori to become a great player? How long were we waiting for Shoni Aluko to deliver? How long were we waiting for Liam Kelly to really justify his place? The list goes on and on and on. And there were so many players that you were just sat there thinking, oh, he'll come good. Just give it a chance. No, they didn't. It only took that massive, great big overhaul in January to really sort of just be cutthroat and just say, no, you're gone, you're out. And that's what needed to happen. As I said, the experiments with Milo, McNulty, just absolute disasters. Those two men alone will probably have the full story, and I'm sure it will come out one day about what exactly happened. But whoever recruited them, for whatever reason, it was a muddled mess. And, it was far from the young, hungry. You look at the two best Reading teams in the two of the best championship teams in Reading's history. Steve Coppell's side and Brian McDermott's side. You had real hunger in those teams. You had the Carachans, you had the Sidwells, And where were those players in this squad? Where were they? I don't think there was a single one of them. We did see a bit of it as the season wore on from the likes of Liam Moore, but otherwise it was just a load of players who just looked like, okay, well, I've been paid to go out there and do a job. Oh, I've not done it very well. Oh, the rest of the team's not done very well either, and we've lost. And it was just that week after week.
Yeah, it's difficult to disagree with that. And I mean, one player that did kind of emerge was Yaku Mate, who I suppose we'll talk about a bit later as one player who might end up being leaving the club actually. But the overall sort of picture when Paul Clement left on December 6th was he'd played 30 games, won 7, drawn 8 and lost 15, so a loss rate of 50%. And Ron Gourlay, he left on November 17th. And from then, Handbags, we really, it was a slow revival, wasn't it? Jose Gomez came in, he dragged out his first win against the 9-man Nottingham Forest team who had just had their manager sacked, and he only won one of his first 9. So it wasn't a case of Jose Gomez coming in and, ultimate like sunshine and rainbows from the first minute.
No, of course not. And to be honest, I don't think anybody could really have expected it to have been. Is a relative unknown, a complete unknown in English football when his name was first mooted. But he's gradually grown to the championship task. I think he's very naive in his first few games. Quickly realised that nice, pretty football, Yap Stam style football, shall we say, doesn't always work. Certainly not when you're fighting in a relegation battle. And it became clear that we weren't scared to go direct when we needed to, and when we signed, as it turned out, we actually signed absolutely superbly in January. So you to be brutally honest, you can only give credit to Jose for what he's done, given where he started. And the signings that he's made, the way that he's managed to galvanise the club with the assistance of Nigel Howe, and get the fans back on side, and long may it continue.
Yeah, Darren, it seemed like when he started, the players still lacked a lot of confidence. There were those mentality issues around, late goals and being able to perform through the whole 90 minutes. What ultimately changed that?
Well, it doesn't help. I think Reading finished with the second worst record of any league team in the 92 in 2018. So coming into that sort of environment, it's really hard to turn that sort of ship around. I think Dave sort of nailed it. It's the lone players. It was that real sweeping of the decks and saying, here's 5 hungry young players with quality. I've had enough of Liam Kelly. I've had enough of Vito Minone. I've had enough of Shoni Aluko. David, he'd had enough. And he just said, look, whether it was Nigel Howe, whether it was Jose Gomez, whether it was a combination of the both, realised that this needed a fix of getting players in through the door. And the financial mess that we're in meant that they had to be loan players, which isn't ideal. And we'll come on to that later, why. But yeah, plugging those players in. And there was a statement of intent because all of them just came straight in. It wasn't, loan signings that we'd seen previously under Steve Clarke, where you had a lot of players sort of, your Alex Fernandez's lurking around. These were players to plug straight in. And that boosts the side because these are players that have come in and they haven't been in that spiral of negativity. You had Lewis Baker coming from a Leeds side doing well. You had Avijara coming in from a Rangers side who were doing quite well under Steven Gerrard. Emi Martinez, doing well at Arsenal. Matt Miazga, been around Chelsea, successful club. You have these players that come in and are used to winning. And that made a big difference coming in alongside players that had been for the last 18 months beat down. And I think that really coming in with Jose Gomez and his positive mentality and giving the fans as Dave said, giving the fans something to rally around as well, all sort of adds up and just sort of slowly starts to turn that ship around. And yeah, we had a little bit of luck along the way, or luck or spirit, whatever you want to call it. The late goals against Ipswich and Wigan, Blackburn, just massive goals. But I think the biggest one of all actually for Jose Gomez and for me was that Nelson Oliveira signing. Although he didn't play as much as we wanted him to, thanks largely to Mr. Mings.
Unforgettable moment of the season.
Reading had been lacking that talisman ever since Jan Kerman got injured. And I think having that main outlet up front. No disrespect to Baldock and John Daddy Bodvarsson, who did try hard, and I like both those players, but they needed that statement striker, and getting that one through the door, I think, again, gave the rest of the team a new focal point to play towards.
Yeah, Nelson Oliveira ultimately he scored 3 goals, which only 4 players scored more than him in the season, despite the fact he started just 9 games, which is quite telling in itself. And yeah, those late wins over Blackburn, Ipswich and Wigan, I think for me they were the catalyst to staying up ultimately with the points they gained and the way we gained them. We also picked up a lot of draws that were very helpful. Stoke, Sheffield Wednesday, Aston Villa, Norwich, Bristol City and West Brom. These are, a lot of good teams in there that we managed to go and as Handbags said a minute ago, be a bit, direct and stubborn and play our game and in a bit of a different way to get a point on the board. And we've ended up, I think, with the second most draws away from home in the league this season, which is a good stat ultimately for a team that was in the trouble it was in. And we've come to a point as the season drew to a close where we had a genuine feel-good factor around the club, and survival was secured with 2 games to play. The fans are taken to Gomez, the fans are taken to the 5 loan players and beyond. Players like Andy Renamotta, who had come to the fore. Mo Barrow has picked up a bit of form towards the end of the season. And, we left Handbags with kind of, for me, to look back on a season of 2 halves, perhaps, or a season of 2/3 and 1/3, as a way you can kind of draw a clear line between the negative atmosphere and the positive atmosphere emanating around the club.
Yeah, I think certainly 2 halves. If I could just go back to that Swansea game, I remember Gomez, his interview post-match in his press conference, and he just turned around and said, "We can't play like this. We can't have another result like this." And I actually think we haven't. Yes, we had. But Sheffield United were just better than us, and Leeds were just better than us. But were they the same as the Swansea game? No, they weren't. And yeah, all right, we've drawn a lot of games in that time, but since we at home in particular, in the second half of the season, we have been immensely strong. With just the Swansea defeat and Leeds defeat in 2019. Everything else, we are unbeaten. All right, you could look at some results and say, yeah, we should have won. In the end, we should have beaten Rotherham. We had 3 glorious opportunities to beat them after they equalised. But it was a point on the board. You could argue we had chances to beat West Brom. We certainly had the chances to beat Birmingham, albeit nothing riding on the game. The trick now is to ensure that we start turning those draws next season into wins. And if we do that on half a dozen to a dozen occasions, then we end up on somewhere between 60, 70, 75 points. And turning some of those defeats into draws, for example, as well. And if we do that, then we're in a good place. We're pushing top half, probably pushing for the playoffs. Don't think, dependent on what we do in the summer, and it's going to be very, very tricky given the financial circumstances. If we do that, then we'll be in a much better place. Ultimately, all we want to see now is progression and an upward spiral again, instead of the constant downward spiral we've had, other than 2016-17, since we were relegated from the Premier League in 2013.
Can't disagree with any of that. And you're speaking of Jose Gomez's interview there. We will end this part of the show with Jose Gomez himself speaking after the 0-0 draw with Birmingham on Sunday to sort of sum up how he felt as the season had closed.
Well, it was since I arrived, because I cannot talk for the other time, the fans really create a lot of emotions, good emotions, and they were very, very, very important for the team, for the players. And today, again, they deserve it. They deserve it to get a few points. Anyway, they enjoyed the way that we played today, with a lot of young players starting the game, and it was a very nice football party. Really grateful for them for what they did during the time that I'm here, and special today, of course.
Tilehurst End podcast.
Read the blog
on tilehurstend.com.
And into Newsbites we go then, because there are some other teams and other bits we'll wrap up from around the club. And to begin with, let's just see how the other teams on the club's books have got on this season. And the women team to begin with, they'll finish their season on the 11th against Chelsea. That's just £3 down at Adams Park in Wickham if you want to get down to that. Fifth place is basically confirmed, and with an FA Cup semi-final in the bag, it was ultimately is a very good season for Reading, because women's football is starting to be a case of Premier League teams investing in their women's teams as a way of growing out and doing it that way and giving a bit more back to the community, etc., etc. So for Reading to be in amongst that, when teams like West Ham and obviously Man City, Chelsea, etc., all doing very well, is a real achievement. So hats off to them. And similarly to the under 23s, they finished third in Premier League 2, lost on penalties to Newcastle in the playoff semi-final after a late extra time penalty drew Newcastle level, and the under 23s then with a sort of second string academy team lost the Berks and Bucks Cup final to Slough Town on Monday. And the under 18s, they finished 10th in the Premier League. Doesn't look too good in the face of it, but they were the best placed championship side in the division, in the country really, in terms of the under 18s league. So 3 pretty decent seasons, we have to say then, all told around the club. And another player who's had a fantastic season is Andy Renossa. He was named the club's official player of the season. We'll have the Tilehurst End vote coming up soon on the website, so look out for that. We'll also have best game and the best goal. Dan, your player of the season, Renossa was the winner. Would you have any complaints with that?
No complaints. I personally went for Yaku Mete, and he was the person that I will be putting the case forward for on the Tilehurst End's player of the season vote. I thought Yaku just had more moments that mattered. I think his goals directly kept us up. I think I worked out that he had won us 7 points this season. Take away those 7 points and we're pretty much relegated. So, but no, in terms of consistency and making an impact on a week in, week out basis when he did play, no complaints with Renossa winning it. A real bright spot, one of the best midfielders I think we've seen emerge, and even more so than players like Liam Kelly. I think his drive and energy really do transform that midfield, and hopefully we can hold on to him, because I think the last midfielder to make an impact like that was Aaron Tishbola, who got ideas way above his station way too early. And hopefully Andy does see the career path of young Aaron, and hopefully sticks around.
Yeah, Yaku Mete and Andy Yeardon made up the top 3 for the club vote, and I think we'll have about 6 or 7 options on the Tilehurst End. I'd probably gone with Yeardon myself, on the basis of not many other players can claim the consistency over the whole course of the season, and I think as an attacking fullback he's probably up there with the division's best, which we can't say for too many of our permanent players. Handbags, where did you end up casting your vote for the player of the season?
I went a little bit left wing, actually. I say left wing, not left wing at all. I went for Remy Martinez, simply because I just felt that, having witnessed, with absolute respect, I say absolute respect, there's not absolute respect to him at all with what I'm going to say, the complete dross that we saw from Vito Manone so often have complete change in Emi Martinez, and the way that some of his sometimes quite miraculous saves kept us in games. And you take the critical save at 2-1 down against Wigan, the critical save at 2-1 down against Norwich, to save the critical save against Villa towards the end of the game. These are all saves that ultimately we went on to take points from that game that we were not in a position to do so had we conceded. And you just can't really, you've never really seen Vito Manone or any of the goalkeepers that we've had probably for the previous 3, 4, 5. Well, perhaps, let's say that. Perhaps you could have Ali Al-Absi. But, Martinez is just absolute different gravy to any of the goalkeepers that we've had since in my opinion, Marcus Hanneman. And I include Alex McCarthy in that based on his time at Reading. He's different gravy now in the Premier League. But to completely transform the football's most specialised position at Reading Football Club deserves some credit, I think. And he was absolutely phenomenal, and he got my vote.
Well, Martinez for me took part in one of the key moments of the season in the Wigan game when Wigan were 2-1 up at the Madstad, and Nick Powell had a glorious chance to make it 3-1, and he was denied from close range by Martinez's sprawling dive. It was an excellent save, and ultimately, if you play that game out with them 3-1 up and compare it to us winning 3-2 and all the rest of it after that, I think that's for my opinion, the key moment in Reading's battle against relegation. And to finish off Newsbites, then we'll discuss the contract situation. There's a selection of out-of-contract players in the senior side this season with Callum Harriott, Ansi Arcola, Paul McShane, and of course the retiring John O'Shea. I think certainly the only two that haven't really been confirmed as leaving yet are Harriott and McShane, so I'll get your opinion on that in a minute. But also with 1 year left on their contract now, Bodvarsson, McCleary, Gunter, Obita, Tyler Blackett, David Myler, Liam Kelly, Andrija Novakovic and Luke Southwood. It's difficult to always know for certain who exactly has what left on their contracts. I think Jose Gomez only has 1 year left on his contract now. But Dan, of those out of contract players, we're talking about Harriott or McShane, is there any desire to keep those on board?
No, not at all. And that's no disrespect to either of them as people. I think, they both, Paul McShane seems a great ambassador for the club. Callum Harriott's always come across really nicely as well. But it goes back to what I said earlier. Reading have got to get away from just carrying players and hoping they'll come good. Paul McShane's been no use at all to us this season. I think his only contribution in the last 12 months was throwing away a 2-0 lead at Blackburn by giving away 2 penalties.
Yeah.
Callum Harriott tried hard. Anybody that comes back after 2 years of injury misery, massive credit to him, but did absolutely nothing really. Scored that goal against Swansea, which was nice moment. But apart from that, it's done nothing. I'm sorry, you've got to get rid every wage. Even people say, oh well, give him pay as you play or a cheap contract. It's still money, and we'll come on to it later because I can see there's a question on FFP, but you've got to watch every penny coming into that's leaving this football club now, and neither of those two have proved they're worth it. If one of them goes on to have a resurgence somewhere else, fair play to them, but no, not for me.
Yeah, I must say I'm not too sure what to do with Harriott, because I do think he is a decent-ish winger.
But based on what, Mark? But is that based on what you've seen in the last 6 months or what you saw 2 years ago?
It's based on what, in the last 6 months, I think he has contributed in games that we've generally not done too badly, and I think he's generally speaking a good enough sort of League One winger. And I understand your point on the financial side, but that's exactly kind of what I mean to why you would maybe keep him. Unless you've got an academy player, maybe you can say Elise is ready to fill his role, in which case fair enough. But in bringing someone else in to replace him, the money that you would spend to keep him doesn't necessarily bring in someone who's better, if you know what I mean. And having someone around who, I think, when it comes to dressing room influence and that sort of stuff, you can never really know what's going on. But for me, he cannot be on that significant a wage, and for us to find a better player would cost more money. So, I take your point, but ultimately I think we're talking about a squad player here, and for squad players, I think that he might be someone that the club do decide to keep around, and maybe if he is willing to accept a pay cut or something, maybe he'll stick around. Because, ultimately, if you're a footballer at this level, it's not just a case of dropping down to League One and everything being okay.
But you've just said he's a good League One winger. Surely the ambition for this football club needs to be finding players that are capable of developing into Premier League players. Surely keeping, even if you go and you pluck someone out of League Two that's okay, might end up only ever League Two, but you see something in him that's got that potential. Like a Tariq Fosu, for example, that we let go, or a Jack Stacey, both of whom you would probably say in hindsight better prospects now than what Harriott's ceiling is. Yeah,
and Harriott's 25, so you're talking about, Jose Gomez will know if there's anything left in him, and if he decides there isn't, then I'm certainly not, either way, I'm not going to cry if Harriott leaves. I just think that when it comes down to the financial side of things, you need squad players, and if the club decide that no academy player is ready to step up, you have got a relatively experienced option there, who I think if you play Harry at 40 games a year, I think he'll give you like 5 goals and maybe 5 assists at a decent rate, and I don't think he's probably that expensive. So,
I think the thing you've got to look at as well is what is actually in the squad right now that is still under contract. And you've still got Gareth, you've mentioned before, you've got Gareth McCleary, a year left on his contract, Mo Barrow, Yaku Mete. They're all
Adrian Popper's still there.
Yeah, well, I would go in.
You've still got players there who are under contract who fill Callum Harriot's position. We've got a massive squad. And unfortunately for Callum Harriott, if he'd have come back from injury and absolutely blitzed the place, and he needed to after 2 years out, and if he would have been the one to have pretty much single-handedly created or scored goals to keep us in the division, then by all means offer him the contract that he would deserve. But unfortunately for him, he hasn't. This again, as I echo what Wimb said, that's no slur on his desire and his attitude. But ultimately, this club is in such a parlous financial state that Callum Harriott is one of those players that you've just sadly got to say, sorry, mate, you need to find yourself another club.
Yeah, I can understand why. I think it will come down to finances, and as I'm kind of making my argument on it, it is a financial situation that we don't know the full details of. Alas, that is certainly what some of the questions are coming in on the mailbag. So let's jump over to that now and see what you guys have to say.
Get social with the boys.
Find them on Twitter
at the Tilehurst End
and facebook.com/the Tilehurst
So as
End.
ever, and as we draw to a close this season, and obviously looking ahead to next season, get the Tilehurst End at gmail.com in your contacts book as the place to go to guarantee your messages coming into the Tilehurst End podcast. And of course, the social media, Facebook and Twitter, are the places to let us know what you think. And starting off this week, we'll merge a couple questions as similar topics pop up. And Scott from the States asks, Gomez and Howe have made it very clear that FFP will keep us from doing a lot of spending in the summer. What has to be done to correct the situation, and realistically, how long will it take? Similarly, Martin Ingram asks, are there creative ways for the owners to get around FFP, stadium naming, sponsorship, the Aluko transfers to the Beijing club that Da Yong also owns? Could they do any of these at an inflated rate through any Chinese connections we have? Now, this financial situation of the club, in terms of how long will it take to fix, is more than just next season as far as I'm aware, because it's done over a 3-season base. And in 2017-18, we lost about £23 million, I think. And it's going to be a loss again this year, perhaps, not to the same amount, but towards 10 million to grab a number out of thin air. This situation is not going to solve itself in one summer unless someone pays us £35 million for Yaku Mete.
Yeah, absolutely nailed it. And that is the situation we find ourselves in. And as we saw in the Zingarevic era, it's the contracts you hand out. The Ron Gourlay era was marked with loads of contract extensions, long contract extensions as well. And you've got to wait for all those contracts to clear off the books. And, it's all well and good. We managed to shift a lot of players out in January, but a lot of them were loans. And they're coming back. Mark McNulty's coming back. David Myler's coming back. Adrian Popper's coming back.
When Aluko comes back, he'll have 18 months left on his contract.
Exactly. So, and you've got these contracts on the books, and you've got to find a club to take them. David Myler's had an awful loan spell at Coventry. I can't imagine there's going to be clubs knocking down our door to sign him. And again, I can't imagine he signed for Reading on the cheap, given that he was coming from a Premier League era wage at Hull. And those are, those hang around the club's neck for a while. Answering Martin Ingram's question about FFP rules, it's interesting he's brought this up because this is a subject that is really kicking off in the EFL at the moment. Steve Gibson, the Middlesbrough chairman, is pretty unhappy at the way these rules are being enforced because there is speculation that clubs like Derby and Aston Villa are getting around FFP rules, not by by the letter of the law, they're following them, but they're breaking the spirit of the rules by doing things like almost like we've done with selling their ground and leasing it back, things like that, sponsorship deals, things like that. So there are ways around it, but whether those loopholes will stay open, and obviously every club is individual. I'm not accusing any of those clubs of doing necessarily wrongdoings, but that's the type of thing that the speculation is out there. So there are things at the moment we can do to get around it, but how long can we do that? I don't know. The aim of the game is Reading have got to get into a situation where they're on average they're losing less than £13 million a season. And when you consider that even in 2004-05, I think under Badesky, Dave, you might be able to correct me, but I think we were losing about £6 million a season.
It was in that ballpark.
Yeah.
And again, back in it was sort of a few years later, when Badesky wasn't in the position to be able to cover those losses with his own cash, albeit in the form of loans. You look at, we ended up selling our best assets after the first Premier League era. You look at Dave Kitson went for personal reasons. It turns out in the end, Kevin Doyle, Andre BK, Ibrahim Sonko, Shane Long, Gylfi Sigurdsson, the list goes on. Are we really, given that we don't have any parachute payments now though, and there are clubs eternally coming down from the Premier League with extortionate amounts of parachute payments, and thereby really, really pushing up and inflating the market. Are we in a position to compete with those? Absolutely no, we're not. The position that we find ourselves in now, pretty much by default, is that we need to sell a player before we can bring one in. That is, that's the stark reality of it. I think over the next couple of weeks, 2-3 weeks, maybe month or so, we're going to be seeing players either released, a la Pavel Pogrebniak, who had a year left on his contract and was released on a free transfer. We'll be seeing things like that going on. Maybe just in a position, we may well be in a position to just take that financial hit and work from there and see what we can do. But ultimately, we are in a pretty shit state. It's not a great place to be.
And it pains me to say this, but we are now a lower championship side financially. We are right in there with the Blackburns of this world, with the Wigans, because the owners are only allowed to put in a certain amount of their own money, and we've got to generate the rest. And gates this season were down. You only need to have a look around how many corporate boxes are sold and how many people sit in hospitality areas to see that isn't, that's not being sold out either. Shirts were on sale early. The club needs to make every penny it can, because it doesn't, the Chinese owners have said we'd like to put in more money, but by these FFP rules, you're not allowed to. Yeah. So, and that's why Reading will forever be at a disadvantage to a team like Norwich, a team like Derby, a team like Villa, who are drawing in double the gates, extra corporate money.
To digress a little bit, isn't the problem now with the Championship is that it's going to become a two-tier league? Yes, once a season, or one or two teams a season are going to do like Norwich have done this year and come up with a promising crop of youngsters and get promoted, like Sheffield United have done. But ultimately, the teams that are going to be in and around the playoffs and whatnot every single year, look at like West Brom, come down from the Premier League, still have a lot of money from the parachute payments, don't have the massive crowds, don't have the academy so much, or don't have the players that they can sell to generate massive amounts of cash. But because they have been in the Premier League in the last 5 years, they automatically just have so much more money than a team like Reading, a team like Wigan, etc., etc. And that is just going to, in the long term, in the next 5-10 years in the Championship, is going to create a huge disparity between the clubs.
I think that can only get worse, though. Ultimately, that can only get worse, because the more you're only going to get 3 clubs going up, and you're going to end up with a continual cycle of more clubs coming down who are going to end up with parachute payments. Yeah, all right, 2, maybe 3 clubs are going to end up they'll be dropping off the parachute payment cliff, but you're going to get 3 clubs to replace those. So the situation, you're going to end up at some point, you're going to have 12, 15 clubs in the Championship, if you haven't already, eventually with massive amounts of parachute payments. And it's going to make, unless we find Reading find a way to become increasingly competitive again, we're going to end up in that bottom half, and as Wim says, and that is absolutely where we are. And ultimately, that's the club we are at the moment. We can't shy away from that. We've been bottom half of the championship since 2014. So we've got to find a way that's going to increase our competitiveness significantly, while also trying to balance the books. And to be brutally honest with you, I'd be surprised if we do that without, I'll be surprised if we end up challenging for anything near promotion over the next 3 years at least. I think we're going to be, hopefully, if Gomez can continue the way he's going, sort of fair to middling, we'll lose as many as we win. Certainly, if the youngsters can keep popping through and developing at the pace they are, but ultimately the situation we're in is we're gonna really struggle because of the ultimately short-sightedness from Ron Gourlay, and
that's it. As Mark said, that £23 million loss, that's going to hang around the club's neck now for another 2 years. So you've almost got to be, it's like going to the casino with 100 quid and you spend 80 quid in the first 10 minutes. You suddenly got to drip through that other 20 quid to get you through to the end of the night. Until they get that massive loss off their hands, they're going to have to be really tight. And then when you do have a couple of years of, minimal losses or maybe small profits, then if you get the right crop of players, a la Wolves, you get to put your foot down on the pedal and go, right, we're going to lose a load of money. We're going to pump in, buy a couple of players. They tried that last year and it was as Dave said, disaster because Sonny Luco was rubbish. All the wages they handed out on players were wasted and we got absolutely nowhere. So yeah, I'm afraid we're just going to have to sort of accept that it's going to be a lean time, and it's going to go back to that Medeski cloth cutting era where we're going to have to sell that big name player.
And the worst thing is if with me is in my the way I look is we were so close to getting ourselves out of that, having and now we find ourselves. It just goes to show just how easy it is to absolutely shaft your finances and not and not have any degree of competitiveness whatsoever to show for it.
Well, that kind of brings me on to the summation of where we are as a club at the moment, and Luke has asked, saying how much budget do we actually have for the transfer window? We must have a little bit, and he reckons around £500,000. The problem is, I think that's, with all due respect, I think that's a bit of a football manager-esque kind of way of looking at it, as the ball come in and here's your slider and you can pick and choose, and maybe that is how it is. But I think for Reading at the moment, the best way I can put it is that we're back to the Reading way, as you said earlier, Handbags, with having to sell Shane Long, having to sell every year for 5-6 years. We sold our best player to keep the club afloat, and it feels like that's what we're going to have to do now.
That's literally where we are. Is we cannot sign anybody until we sell somebody.
And can we do that? And in the Reading way that we used to do, and be successful at the same time? Is it really possible, or is it any more possible now, given the state of the Championship and the football? Is it possible to actually be successful that way?
Yeah, I think you can. I think you just need one player to go for big money, a £10 million fee, and suddenly, bam, there's your budget. It is doable, but it's also painful because it might mean Reading losing an Andy Rinomota, and then suddenly you're back to square one, and then how are you going to replace him? Well, we've only got so much money to do so. So it's definitely doable, and it's about getting the right caliber of player in. I thought it was really interesting when you look at the Sheffield United and Norwich squads. There were basically, I think, apart from Tim Krul was the only real established Prem player that either of them had in their sort of main starting 11s on a week-to-week basis. And that sort of shows that Reading need to, they've tried this strategy of getting players on the way down, your Shonny Alucos, your Dave Edwards, your David Milers. Reading need to go back to that old way of getting players on the way up. Just as we saw with these loanees, we saw the impact that they had because they've all got points to prove. And Reading need to get back to that sort of method of signing and get players that values are going to go up. How many players have Reading signed in the last 4 or 5 years that the value's gone up? Liam Moore? Dave, can you think of anybody else that's actually increased their value?
I'd say Mate has.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah. But yeah, there's very, very few.
So until Reading get players into the football club, because Shoni Aluko, that was 7 million. You pretty much it's a bit like buying a new car. The second they drove him off Fulham's forecourt, he lost half his value.
He lost the wages.
Exactly. And if Reading keep signing players like that, they were never going to make money from Myler. They were never going to make the 2 million they made off Manone back. So they've got to get back to signing players who think, okay, they're going to deliver for us, but even if we sell them, we're going to make money off them. And that's what Nick Hammond did so brilliantly. And hopefully Nigel Howe can do the same. Do we know if our new technical director is staying on as well? Mark Bowen. He's been very quiet on that front.
It was only on a contract to the end of the season, wasn't he? But yeah, that's going to be an interesting one because I think he certainly had some kind of, well, I'd say that he definitely had a very positive input to the to performances. Certainly, getting that point out of West Brom in particular. That'll be an interesting one because he's I think based on what we see, and he's things are just that little bit more positive.
Well, with Nigel Howe as well, the club when he came in, I think the club was still effectively saying he's kind of on an interim basis to an extent, that they were still looking long term for a sort of new CEO type figure. With, you remember, Gianluca Nani had a very small period at the club, replacing Brian Teverden, and they are still, as far as it seemed at the time, looking for someone. So as far as we know, it's Nigel Howe in charge at the moment, and that. When you talk about Nicky Hammond and the work that he did, Derek Walmsley asks if you could sell one player for decent money, who would it be? And this kind of brings me back to the point of selling your best player every season, etc., etc. We sold Gylfi Sigurdsson for about £7 million, which at the time probably represented his market value to an extent, with the basis that I presume he had some sort of sell on. When it comes to young English players now, Rinamotta, Loader, whoever gets plucked, their market value, if Rinamotta played for Derby, they would be demanding £20 million for him. If he plays for Reading, I'm really not sure that we can actually get what is the player's value, and that makes it just again another bitter pill to swallow, really. I suppose in terms of the one player you'd sell question, Handbags, who would you happy let go if we got a decent fee in?
I wouldn't be happy to let him go, but I think it's going to be inevitable that we're going to let Liam Moore go. Certainly after last season's shenanigans, he's gone on record now and said that he won't be pushing for a move. But I think certainly lower end Premier League clubs like Brighton again will be circling, or maybe top end Championship clubs, Stoke maybe, or West Brom if they don't go up, or someone like that. I think we will end up seeing Liam Moore go, and I think we might even be in a position to be seeing that 8-figure sum that we've not yet seen before.
Yeah, I'll probably say John Swift for me, in terms of a player who I don't particularly rate myself, but seems to be worth in the £5 million plus mark, and we signed for free ultimately. I'd probably say I wouldn't mind seeing him go. I don't know about yourself, Dan.
I'm undecided. In terms of, again, players that you would sacrifice, Mate, probably the big one, because of sort of, I don't know how to best put this, is not attitude as such, but his long sort of term application, because that is what's been questioned by Jose Gomez. He was asked in one of his news conferences what's been what's been behind Mate's form, and he just sort of said, well, he needs to focus on what he wants to do sort of long term and put in the work rate. And I get the vibe with Yaku that it could end up a little bit of a Leroy Lita situation where he's got the talent, but are things outside of football going to keep tugging at him and stop him reaching that top level? And I think this is one of those cases where if you sell high, I think it might well come back in our favour.
Yeah, with Mate, we will discuss it. There's a question a bit later on, but he did a very interesting interview with Get French Football News, that online portal, and kind of insinuated that he'd stick around for another year if he had to. But ultimately, I think his long-term ambition is to be back in France, which might play into our hands this summer if there's some teams knocking around for him. The next questions then we'll answer on a hypothetical basis, I think, because Ray says, what loan players can we afford to keep and who can we let go that won't affect us in the long run? And Jim saying, in what order should we pursue getting the current loanees in on permanent deals? Miazga is a clear number one in my opinion. As we've just discussed, I think, picking and choosing our realistic options to bring in is a bit far-fetched at the moment, but because there is a lot of time in the summer for things to happen, let's take to a scenario where we have sold Liam Moore and Yaku Mate for a combined £15 million, for example, and that gives us a couple million to go and spend. If we, in terms of the loanees handbags, realistically, where would you immediately go for your first option?
I'd love to play Emi Martinez.
That's why I said the word realistically.
So yeah, that all depends on what the position is at Arsenal, and can we afford him? Is he? Well, he's certainly a class above us at the moment. Matt Miazga, his partnership that he's forged with Liam Moore has been absolutely exceptional. It's been up there with that. To me, that Ingemarson Sonko partnership. They just have an understanding now of each other. So Miazga, I think, would be the critical one. You've got to look at one of the central midfielders as well. And do you know what? The one that hasn't even been mentioned really is gone quietly about his business. But I actually think is the more talented of the two is Ajaria. And I think that we could potentially look at getting him back, if not on permanent basis next season, then certainly on loan. I really, really like him. And there's something about him that he's got a dose of the Patrick Vieira and Wanku Kanu's about him that I just really like. He's got that insane ability to just come out of a challenge with the ball because of his go-go gadget leg. He's just, I would, if not Miazga, if Miazga's out of the question, then certainly go back and get Ajaria as far as I'm concerned.
Just on Ajaria, Wimb Senior, obviously I sit with, said that to him he's the best sort of player at doing that. What you said, Dave, since Neil Webb in a Reading shirt, obviously a bit before all of our time, but given the career Neil Webb went on to have, I think that's sort of high praise indeed.
I did see Neil Webb play a couple of times in my very, very early football watching days, and again that's one of the things that I really that I found was that he was just insanely good at coming out of a challenge with the ball, and that stuck with me.
I think he's one of those. I think out of those 5 loanees, I think we'll rule out Mr. Ezatola, but out of those, I think he's probably him and Miazga are the 2. I think the only realistic hopes we've actually got of getting back here. Baker maybe, but I think he's getting to the stage now where he's going to want to, test himself at Premier League level. And I think a lower Prem club or a top Championship club will take a look at him and go, there is something there. I think Leeds wanted to hang on to him. Sorry, Dave, I can't see Emi coming back. I can't see a scenario where that happens.
I can't, but I'd like to see it.
Yeah, I'd like to see it as well, to be honest. I think with Miazga and Baker are probably both in the same bracket now as to thinking, what is another Championship loan spell really going to do for me if that's what they get offered by Chelsea? I think they'll probably, and if I were them, kick up a fuss and demand that they get sold for whatever fee they can, and maybe they'd have some leverage in that case. And that leaves us, I think, with Ajaria being the one that I think, honestly, with the way Liverpool are, and supposedly they rate him quite highly there, and the season that he's had has presumably been his best football of his career. I think there's a realistic chance that we can keep him for next season. And he's also one of the ones, Gomez said that we didn't pay for all of the players some of the loan players we didn't pay for at all. I think he's probably one of them, and I think Liverpool might be able to mimic that deal for next season. And the final one we haven't mentioned, Nelson Oliveira. If we sell Mate for £8 million, £5 million, Oliveira supposedly available for around 3, maybe less than that. Is that a clear, just go and get him sort of deal?
I'm going to let Dave answer first.
That's my worry. Is that he gets injured a lot. We've already seen what can happen to his hamstring. Yeah, all right. The Tyrone Mings thing was from Oliveira's point of view very unfortunate. But he also has that sulky quality, or not, or the what's the antonym to quality about him?
Trait.
He didn't have the greatest of times at Norwich. He didn't have the greatest of times at Forest, who were let's be honest. I think he was signed. Was he signed by the old Brentford manager, Warburton? By him. They went on a little bit of a downward spiral, and he didn't get on with that. And if we're gonna be the sort of club that's going to be fair to middling at the very best over the next few years, genuinely speaking, is Nelson Oliveira the type of character that you want at the club? And for me, he has got to promise to not sulk, basically.
Have it in his contract.
Yeah.
There is the fear that he becomes a fair weather player, basically.
Yeah, exactly that. And I'm not convinced that he's the sort of player that you want in a struggling Championship side, beyond what we've seen so far. Don't get me wrong, his attitude when he was on the pitch trying to drag us out of that was absolutely first class. Whether or not there was anything behind the scenes at Forest and Norwich, not sure. Clearly Gomez likes him. There's obviously the Portuguese link there. They clearly get on well. He's got the absolute best out of him that he could have done in the limited space of time that we've had him available. But yeah, if Gomez thinks that he can do that, then and based on what we've seen so far, then I'm all for it. But what happens if Gomez has a very poor start of the season next season as a result of some of the off-field issues that we've got, the financial issues, gets the boot? Let's face it, the Chinese haven't exactly been shy in giving a manager the boot. Who's to say that signing Oliveira on a 3-year contract wouldn't completely backfire?
And that's it. That's exactly my fear. And it goes back to what we were talking about with Callum Harriott as well. It's Reading aren't in a position where they can gamble anymore. Reading have got to be sure that this is a guy that if we are going to commit decent wages to, because he's not going to come cheap, that it's a player that come rain or shine is going to deliver or is going to have a resale value. And again, the fee it will take to get from Norwich, what is it, 3 million? That's a lot of money. That is a lot of money when you've got not a lot to play with. And unless Reading Reading ended up selling Rinomota, Moore, Bodvarsson, and Mate, and got 30 million quid through the door, then you'd go, yeah, that's you've got a little bit of wiggle room to play with. But in the current climate, unless we get a really favourable loan deal again from Norwich, I think it's just going to be, unfortunately, thanks, but we've got to get more realistic. So I like him, but as Dave said, there are too many question marks given the financial situation we're in at the moment.
Well, it's one of the many questions that will be prevalent and hopefully answered in the due course in the summer. And Jack Killick with the last question, the mailbag. Thanks, Jack. Is always a good email comes in from Jack every now and again. It's nice to have someone drop us a bit more of a considered lengthy email as well, which Jack always does. And he says, with it looking like we can't sign any of the loan players permanently, where do you think Reading will finish next season? Also, what are your thoughts on selling Yaku Mate? I've seen Lille interested. In my opinion, we should sell him. He does offer something different than others, but he's very streaky and doesn't have the technical ability to play the football Gomez wants long term. Probably why he almost went in January. keep up the good work on the podcast. Thank you very much, Jack. And we'll obviously get into next season in the final part of the show. But final point on Mate, and you can bring up Mate and talk more broadly about this if you want. But Handbags, the Gomez sort of style, we obviously didn't sign the right players for Jaap Stam's style. We obviously couldn't sign the right players for Paul Clement's style because we didn't know what it was. Do we, having gone in January and signed the players for Jose Gomez that were the right, Ejaria, Baker, players that could play his style, do we continue to do that? Is that the priority with what little money we do spend and the players we do bring in, is just to make sure at the very basic level they can play the passing style that he ultimately wants to play?
Absolutely. I think if I can envisage where we're going to go, I think we could be investing fairly deeply into the Portuguese market. I think that might be a fairly obvious place to go. It's not the most expensive, and they've got some technically very gifted players, some of whom have the ability to play in the Championship. I think they'll be interspersed with some more traditional British players who have more of a technical ability about them, probably on loan, like Ejaria, or perhaps a sort of Lewis Baker Mark II, and that's where we'll be going. I think absolutely the players that come in, if they can't play the way Jose wants to play, then they won't be coming. It's as simple as that.
And Dan, Mate fitting in to the Gomez style, and as we've said about the possibility of him leaving, is it something that we are going to have to, as popular as he is with the fans, is it something that a lot of people I think need to kind of get with the idea that he'll be the one to leave?
As I said, he would be the one if I had sacrificed a player that would go for, because I do think that there are those lingering questions about his desire. I certainly think he's got passion. You see that, and he's obviously a fun guy. But is he too fun a guy? Is he gonna, the next time things go badly for him and he gets dropped for 3 or 4 games, how's he going to affect? What's he going to be like on the training ground? I don't know the bloke personally, so I can only go by the snippets again. And obviously, you look at the fact of, Stam sent him away on loan, and he nearly got sold in January. So there's obviously something that's not convincing managers that he's a long-term sort of horse to back in the race. But in terms of does he fit technically into Gomez's style, well, he's bagged enough key goals so to think that he can certainly have a role. But again, is he going to be a starting role long term? Maybe not. So I think fans do need to get used to the idea that he might go, and this might be one of the things that he could be a player that turns into a Michael Antonio, that we go, oh, why did we let him go? That he could quite easily turn into another James Henry, where you think, there is something there, but has he got enough to put it together long term? So we'll see.
Well, that pretty much draws the 2018-19 season to a close, but there is still one part of the podcast left to go as we look ahead to next season.
Tilehurst End podcast.
Any other business?
Okay, then let's wrap up the Prediction League, which has been, if we said the Championship was turning into a 2-tier league, then this has definitely been a 2-tier league this season, and we'll start from the bottom with how everyone's done. And Tom Crocker of the Woki Paper, or formerly of the Woki Paper, has been helping out Ollie with the Weekend Preview podcast, has arrived in last place of the 8 of us in the Prediction League this season. 22 points for Tom. He took a little while to get his first correct result. I think it was Derby away was the first time he nailed a score. So Tom with 22 points comes in last. Then it's myself and Sim joint 6th with 23 points. Alan Westy, who won it last year, he put together from bottom to 5th in the last couple of weeks. He got 0-0 against Birmingham. So with 24 points, he comes in 5th. And Dan, yourself, incredible start to the season. You had 23 points about the halfway stage, and you've ended up on 32 with, I don't know, perhaps you didn't see Reading's turnaround coming.
No.
But 32 points you finished on there in 4th, and then it's a tie for second place with Johnny Williams and Handbags both getting 1-1 for the Birmingham game, so they're on 34 points. and it meant that Ollie, the weekend preview host, and of course the common guest on this show, 35 points. Ollie Allen takes the Tilehurst End Prediction League for 2018-19. Just looking back over his results, I think it's the draws what won it. He's picked up the draw at Rotherham on 1, the 0-0 at Sheffield Wednesday he got. So some very decent. He got the draw at Wigan as well. So yeah, some decent predictions from Ollie. 35 points. By the way, just comparing this to last season, the predictions were much stronger. The last season we ended up on around 20 points or so, and I think we accustomed ourselves to Reading being a bit crap this year. So well done to everyone involved. We'll take a look at who's involved with the Prediction League. As I say, with Tom won't be with us for next season, so we'll have a look at that. And big congratulations to Ollie on that one. Unlucky you two, because you were certainly in it much more than I was, and you can round off the show then with a couple of points for next season. And I'd like to get one hope and one fear each from you. And Dan, if you can start us off with something tangible that you can see happening, that will send us up or down the table.
My hope is just that the academy players that we've seen make the breakthrough this season continue. I'd like to see, someone like Elise or Loader or Rinomota turn into the sort of next Sigurdsson, the player that 10 years from now we'll be watching, hopefully for Reading in the Premier League, if not, gracing it in the Champions League, and saying we got to see him really break through. So that's my one hope.
Yeah, my hope, I would have to say, is kind of on Jose Gomez again, is that, I think he's done as much as he can or as much as he needs to in terms of endearing himself to the fans, but really we see a manager who's always wanted to be in the English sort of, top flight and championship, really progress, and he's at a good age still, and I think he's learning a lot about the English game, and hopefully that'll come through in his substitutions and the other sort of facets of his game that we haven't quite seen come off just yet. So that's my hope. Handbags, what's your hope for the season?
Yeah, I'm not going to go too deep and meaningful with this. I just want to see us improve based on what we've seen in the last 2 seasons, which has been absolute dross.
And your fear?
My fear is we don't.
fear of the dross, basically. I'd say my fear is as we're talking with the transfers, is that we sell a few players and do make that sort of 30 million or whatever, realise we have 10 million to spend, and then go and spaff it on another Sonny Aluko. That's my fear, is that the club haven't quite learned its lessons in terms of bringing in those permanent signings, because as I say, it's going to be a long summer, and exactly what we do with it is going to be up until deadline day, I think, this year.
Yeah, and my fear is administration, because I do worry about these finances. And I think the fact that Gomez was saying we have till June 30th to sell players does raise a real red flag about whether we are actually in that sort of situation we had where we had Saladam Lafondra in that window. I do worry if it's going to be that close, but hopefully not, and hopefully we'll avoid that.
Yeah, Jose Gomez describing it as a shock in a recent interview with the Portuguese newspaper when he found out how bad the club's situation was. So yeah,
sorry, not administration. I meant failing FFP. I don't think we're in danger of that. I don't think we're going to do it Bolton.
Yeah, transfer embargo is a scenario I can genuinely, I can see us, waking up one day and realising we got a transfer embargo. That's certainly something that might befall us in the next 12 to 18 months. And finally, a rough prediction for where we're going to finish. I'll start us off and say I would imagine it's going to be somewhere between 14th and 17th next season. I know as fans we're always inclined to say that we're going to do better next season, and I genuinely this season I do believe we will, compared to last season when I was probably just hoping. And I don't think it's too much to ask for this team and this manager and this club at the moment to do that. So I don't know, Dan, where would you lay your cards at the moment?
This is one of the hardest. Next season is going to be one of the hardest to predict as we sit here now, because there are so many question marks around so many players in the club. So many players coming back. Are we going to be able to shift them on? Who are we going to get back in? I can't say honestly. It could literally be anywhere between, state the obvious, 1 and 24th. That I could not tell you sitting here now where we will finish. If you force me to make a prediction, my gut feeling is around about 16th, but I can easily see scenarios where we are scraping for our lives, or where we're one of the surprise packages.
Handbags, how's your belief in the lack of dross, or the amount of dross we're going to see next season?
I just echo what Wimb just said. There's absolutely no way you can predict what's going to go on. I think come August the 3rd, we're going to have a very youthful starting lineup, and the fans, if that is the case, the fans have got to be patient. If they continue to be patient and they get behind them and allow them the time and space to make the mistakes that they will inevitably make, then I think with a manager like Gomez, who seems to be really, really, really good on the man management side of things, then I can see us being in and around mid-table to lower mid-table, sort of somewhere between sort of 12th and yeah, pretty much the same as what you are. Well, you are 12th to 17th. If one of those or two of those youthful players turn out to be the real deal, then there's no reason why we couldn't end up being a little bit higher. But yeah, it literally all depends on what we do between now and August the 3rd. It's impossible to predict.
Yeah, and can I just mention, because you brought it up, Dave, about the fans. Fans can't do what they did in the start of the Brendan Rodgers era, where I think right from that very first game against Forest, I think there were already boos and shouts of "get forward" and things like that. I think they have to sort of stick with it. But to end on I don't think they will do that. But to end on a real positive as well, and with you on the show as well, Club 1871. Apologies if you were going to bring it up anyway, Mark, but I feel they really need a mention in talking about how the sort of club's fortunes turned around. To see it go from, fading down to a point where there was a couple of hundred people in that South Stand to selling out on the final day. Massive kudos to the people that organised it and the people that stuck with it as well, because, you saw some of the flack that they were getting on social media. People shouting out about how they were costing the club money. Why are they there? They're embarrassing us. And, seeing them, really embrace Portugal Day. We barely even mentioned the Birmingham game, but that was the highlight of the Birmingham game for me, seeing 1,400 Reading fans absolutely loving being at the Medeski, which is something we've not seen a lot for the past few years. So I know you've been a big fan of it and helping keep it going. So hats off to you, Dave, and to the football club themselves as well for giving the fans a chance to see it through. And I think it's become one of the real sort of highlights now when you go to the Medeski.
Yeah, that's appreciated, and thank you for that. We were absolutely over the moon to reach four figures for West Brom, and then to sell out against Birmingham was phenomenal. If you'd have said to us that after the Blackburn game, which was one of our lowest figures, I think it was 160 something in there, that we would sell out in was that end of February, beginning of March, 2 months later, and half a dozen league games later, we'd have laughed in your faces, to be brutally honest with you. But yeah, free beer's done its thing. Thank you again. and yeah, long may it continue. I just hope we continue to get those numbers. And I think, if we continue being positive, then it can only be good for the club. The feedback that we've had from the club has been phenomenal. They're absolutely over the moon, particularly with what's happened over the last 2 months. The Nigel Howe has spoken to us personally. We spoke to Sir John Medeski on yesterday after the game. We spoke to a couple of other. The manager came and we were effectively what happened was we were invited just very briefly behind the scenes, and the manager came and thanked us. We had Gareth McCleary up there come and thank us. And also I'd just like to mention that certain Michael Gilks was up there as well, which just completely made my day. My favourite all-time Reading player, So the feedback that we've had from them was that it really, really makes a difference. Certainly from Gareth McCleary was very, very positive about it. And to be brutally honest with you, I don't think it's going to go anywhere next season. In terms of the club are going to say you're going to be moving. We still need to have those discussions with the club because it was only initially for the one season to see where it goes. In terms of numbers and popularity, but the feedback that we're getting, certainly from the directors and the people high up in the club, is very, very positive, and long may it continue.
Yeah, but definitely echoed those sentiments, and it brings back for me the thing that I was going to say at the end of the podcast is that, you know, doing this as a podcast, and I know you guys doing it for Club 1871, and for, you know, everyone who runs a fan account on Twitter and everything like that, and it is a fan community thing, and certainly at Reading in the past, you know, decade, whatever sort of time period you want to put on it, that has been difficult to maintain, and it's been difficult certainly in the past couple of years to motivate, you know, the fans and to bring together a sense of community, and that is something that I think this past, you know, maybe 3-4 months even, has had some real traction and has had some real momentum towards it to hopefully carry us on into the next season. So, yeah, hopefully Club 1871 will be in its place. I certainly don't see any reason why it wouldn't be. And, you know, hopefully the fans will continue to flock to it, and the players and everyone. It will continue to build something really tangible around the club that we can build from onto the pitch, and that brings us to an end to this episode, really, with all that's left for me to do is to thank the two men that have been on here for well over an hour discussing what's been a roller coaster season. So Dan and Dave, thank you very much for coming on.
Cheers, pleasure.
Not a problem. Just before we go, I would just like to raise my prerequisite reason for coming on, apart from speaking about Reading Football Club, of course. So on Saturday, May the 11th, that's this coming Saturday, for those of you that are calendar aware, I am participating in the annual Keswick to Barrow Walk. That's 40 miles uphill, down Dale in the Lake District. I'm doing it for the Christie Hospital in Manchester. A bit of a strange one, you might think, but ultimately they are the people that have kept my dear stepmother alive for 16 years, it has to be said, after she was terminally diagnosed in 2003 with ovarian cancer. They are one of the largest cancer research hospitals in Europe, so it's not just a northwestern small hospital that has kept my stepmom alive. It's up there with the John Radcliffe Infirmary with cancer research, world-renowned. And hopefully, on the back of this, I may get a little bit more in the way of sponsorship. So, yeah, I'm doing it on behalf of the Christie Hospital, the Christie charity, to donate, if you don't mind me saying so, Mark, is if you visit www.keswick2, that's the number 2, barrow.co.uk, and click on donate and search for my name, David Harris, and then click donate to the walker. It's all secure. You can donate anonymously as much or as little as you like. And all donations are gratefully received. I just thought I'd throw that in there at the end. And hopefully on the back of this, I do get a little bit more in the way of money for what is a quite phenomenal charity.
And you're absolutely welcome to do that, Dave. We will put that link on the podcast article as well. If you drop that into me after the show, I'll make sure that everyone can find that as easily as possible, and it certainly sounds like an excellent cause, so thank you for sharing that. And anyone hoping to back Handbags can do that via the Tilehurst End website if you go to the podcast article after listening to this. And really, again, it is a case of thanking everyone for listening to the podcast for this season. Myself being able to do this in terms of, you know, changing jobs and all kinds of various things that have gone on to be able to have a bit of normality in the sense of, you know, every Sunday night or Monday night having some friends to talk about Reading Football Club is a luxury, really, and to have that then recorded and being able to broadcast that and have people come and listen to it is an absolute privilege. And I'm sure you guys as well, you can understand how that is certainly not something that we take for granted, and being able to have the Tilehurst End go through another season and to grow, and to, you know, from having mentions on the telly during the FA Cup game and to meeting Jose Gomez during the season and having players like Jan Kermigant come on the show as well, it shows that it's a really worthwhile thing for us to be doing, and we're really happy with all the support and you know, everyone who puts into the Patreon campaign or just likes our tweets every now and again. It is fully appreciated, and we will certainly be back next season with all the trials and travails of Reading Football Club and everything that goes on in and around the club. Hopefully we'll have some content for you during the summer. The podcast will go offline, but in terms of the website, keep an eye on that for, you know, all the transfer news, and hopefully we'll be able to speak some interesting figures as well and do some analysis. As I say, certainly post-season analysis is coming up in the next few days. And really as well, my advice for Reading fans is to enjoy the break while it lasts, because this has been, once again, I'm intent that supporting Reading is not a boring thing, and this has once again been a non-boring season, and I don't think the summer and I don't think next season is going to be boring either. So enjoy the break while it lasts. I know that a lot of fans are disappointed the season is over, but it will come back round sooner than you think. Pre-season and all the rest of it will be back round sooner than you think, and this podcast will be back in due course as well. Thank you for listening once again. This is the 2018-19 season review. Come on, yours.
You smile, funny how the crumbs always leave a trail, even when it seems it's on your tail. Funny how you always leave a trail. You smile, why do you sit on this side of the tree? Please tell me why don't you break this old biscuit for me? Just